Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're testing the Intel ARC B580 graphics card. Heard a lot of good things about this. I consider myself a somewhat early adopter of ARC cards. I had the A750. Of course that did have some driver issues back in the day, as did other variants too. But hopefully things have been sorted out. From what I've seen so far in reviews, they have been. Seen a couple of not so positive reviews, but I'm going to test 15 games at 1080p today, a resolution I feel that this card is best suited at. I have the Sparkle OC version of the card, a really good looking GPU, this one, nice backplate on it. It even comes with this anti-sag kit here, and in the case it looks pretty good. Doesn't really match anything unless you've got blue components, which probably not many of you do, but it's a great looking triple fan GPU. What I will say is that this runs super quiet even under load, really hard to hear inside the case, no coil whine either, anything like that. But let's get into the games and see how it does. We're going to start things off with Apex Legends here. This was a game that did have some trouble with the A750 back when I tested it. Now I was using DX11, and to be honest, when I fired up DX11 mode, the game was a bit all over the place and I thought, oh no, Intel ARC, here we go, an absolute mess. But what I realised was that we can also select DX12 from the Steam launcher, and doing so makes it run absolutely perfectly, almost a really smooth experience with DX12 mode. I'm running it with the highest settings bar spot shadows, which are disabled. TSAA was also on. We are using 100% resolution. If you've got a high refresh rate monitor, it's going to run absolutely fine with the highest settings here. Of course, in a competitive online title, you may want to think about turning a few things down, but as you can see in DX12 mode, it's running really nicely. That frame time graph is really smooth. Now I am using a powerful i9 processor, but I've capped it at 125 watts, so it performs more like a 14700K. I also tested briefly with my 12400F, and there were some scenarios whereby the CPU was holding us back at this resolution, but I think you're going to get away with it most of the time, to be honest. As a GPU test though, I wanted to make the most of the card. Oh, let's get him. Oh, I've been wiped out. We'll move on to Baldur's Gate 3 next. As you can see, we still have the B580 in the system. Well, I'd hope so for a B580 benchmark. Of course, the highest settings across the board here, apart from depth of field, because it's icky, in my opinion. I turn it off in every game that I play. Some of you may beg to differ. The highest settings then with TAA. Again, 100% scaling. I've tried to avoid any upscaling where possible, but there will be a few instances whereby I've had to enable it for the sake of hitting 60 frames per second. Not had to enable any sort of upscaling here. Sorry if you can hear my dog's feet in the background here. He's wandering around looking for his tennis ball, which he's probably jammed under the sofa. But back to the gameplay. Baldur's Gate 3, 111 FPS on average with a 1% low of 64 and a 0.1% low of 55. So a very consistent experience once again, and the game looks pretty decent at the high settings. Just thought I'd take a little walk around the city here, one of the most intensive areas of the game. Moving on to Black Myth Wukong now, and man's got no room on his hard drive these days, so I've had to install the demo version, the benchmark run, as opposed to the full game, so I apologise for that. But let's start off with 1080p low here. As you can see, we have XeSS enabled and set to 100%, so we're not upscaling from a lower resolution. This is native res. We had to stick to low for this one because medium did see drops below 60 FPS, but with low, it does look a little ropey around the edges, but we saw 71 frames per second, a 1% low of 48 and a 0.1% low of 42. So a few little dips and drops here and there, as you can see. The best thing to do, I think, with this one is set the resolution to 80%, albeit with XeSS still enabled, and this is going to bump the average up to 82. I was thinking or hoping that it would also bump those percentile lows up, but it didn't really do that. Still, the average was improved, but this is a very demanding game. Now, Counter-Strike 2 is another online competitive title, and you may want to think about lower settings here, but I went straight in at high, turned off MSAA because it's quite an intensive option, and I was surprised to see a really good frame rate in game. Again, if you've got a high refresh rate monitor, say 240 Hz, 144 Hz, you're not going to have any problems running with higher settings when using this card. Surprisingly, this game does allocate about 7 gigs of memory and uses about 6 at these settings, so it's nice to have 12 gigs with this card. We've got that extra sort of headroom to play with. Let's move on to 12 gigs now, everyone. Come on, let's set the standard 12 gigs minimum, maybe 10 gigs minimum yeah, that's a nice place to be. Elden Ring is of course capped to 60 FPS by default, and I tend to leave that cap in place. The Intel ARC card had no problem with hitting this. It was as smooth as anything here. 60 frames per second with a 1% low of 55 and a 0.1% low of 49. We can see that the card isn't really being fully utilised, and that is because of the FPS cap in place. So far so good in terms of utilisation as well. I'm not having any issues thus far with the games tested. Now I do have resizable bar enabled, of course, and you're going to want to make sure you have a system that supports rebar to get the best out of a card like this. These are still very much intended for modern systems, these ARC cards, but drivers, they are in a really good place now, and I think the B580 has launched with decent support out of the box, so to speak. Forza Horizon 4 now, testing 4 because I think it got delisted like yesterday and I prefer it to 5 to be fair. Anyway, let's cut to me inside an old Escort. Probably should rephrase that. Let's cut to me driving an old Escort. Forza Ultra settings, 2 times MSAA, along with the preset here, didn't change a thing, and at 1080p we saw 157 FPS with a 1% low of 132 and a 0.1% low of 94. Look at this drifting, honestly, this skill as we make our way down the hill here. Let's take this baby off-road. Can we just do a slight... Oh, there we go. Let's just zoom over the hill. Lovely. The frame rate's still holding steady. Nothing to worry about with Forza Horizon 4 here. The card is being fully utilised. I've noticed this one clocks up to 2850 megahertz. I think I saw a Tech Power Up review, the written review of this card. And in conclusion, I don't think there was much of a performance difference between this and the standard limited edition. This one's about a tenner more here in the UK. I paid $259 for it. GTA 5 now, a DX11 game. We can of course choose to run it in DX10 or 10.1, but that's absolutely pointless in my opinion. Here we have the highest settings apart from advanced options, which were set to off, as well as MSAA in favour of FXAA, which is going to give us better performance. Now I do recall this game running a bit all over the place with the previous gen ARC cards before the drivers were sort of fixed, you know, so we haven't got the same out of the box issues with this newer generation of ARC cards, and GTA 5 is running really nicely. What I will say is that it appears the card isn't being fully utilised. We're hovering around 55 to 60%, but it's not affecting things in terms of the GPU clock. We're still hitting 2850 megahertz. Let's just throw a few grenades around here, see if things hold up. Oh, look at that, lovely. We can see by the power consumption as well that the card isn't being fully utilised on paper, or maybe it is. Maybe it's just not being reported as so, because the frame rate, the averages and the percentile lows look pretty right to me. Okay, I wanted to try Half-Life 2 next. This is an older game, but it's one that runs in DX9, and I do recall DX9 games having a problem before with ARC cards. Maybe not these days, as I've been saying, the drivers have been updated, but I turned everything to its respective highest settings, apart from MSAO, which I set to 4x instead of 8x here. I think this one must be capped at about 290, 293, something like that, because it averaged 291 and it was as smooth as anything, with a 1% low of 236 and a 0.1% low of 206. So pretty smooth sailing here. Sorry, I've just been battered around the head by this guy. Let's go and get our own back. I'm going to go inside and see what we can launch at him. Yeah, this can will do. Right, where are you? Come here. Come here. Down the stairs. Let's launch this can at his head. Oh, take that. Run away. Run away. Yes, DX9, older game. Running pretty well here on the ARC B580. Okay, so for The Witcher 3, we'll actually start off with Ultra. We'll select SSR, or Screen Space Reflections Low, as well as TAA. I'll test this one with Ray Tracing, as well as XeSS after this initial gameplay. Just running around outside the city here, and things are actually performing pretty well. We're seeing 149 frames per second on average, with a 1% low of 97 and a 0.1% low of 73. I'm actually really happy with how this card is performing. I wasn't sure what to expect. You know, I'd read loads of reviews, mostly positive, a couple not so positive, and I just had it in my head that there were going to be a few more hiccups than this. Maybe in some games there still might be, maybe during the rest of this benchmark run there may be, but I'm actually really pleasantly surprised. I have been following ARC cards since they released. I bought the A750 pretty early on, been with it through all of the driver updates. It went from a sort of card that was pretty all over the place to one that's a decent choice, a decent alternative from the standard Nvidia and AMD offerings. And I think so far, based on what I've seen in this testing, I would call the B580 the same. If you're thinking about a 4060, for example, perhaps purchase one of these instead. With The Witcher 3 now, we've switched to the RT preset, not RT Ultra. We'll also enable XeSS and set that to quality mode. Alright, now there seems to be a bit of a weird visual glitch here with the shadows. Everything does seem a little too dark. Perhaps it's just my monitor and recording software, but the shadows seem a bit weird. Everything seems a bit too oversaturated here. Performance-wise, however, we are still seeing at least 60 FPS, 67. Let's just cause a bit of trouble in and around the city here. The 1% low was 44 and the 0.1% low was 13, so definitely not a extremely consistent experience. Let's look at the VRAM usage here, allocating almost 10 gigs, using about 9. So an 8GB card would be in trouble here, wouldn't it? But I think the fact that we've got 12 gigs here is definitely helping us out, though it's not a perfectly smooth experience. So perhaps avoid ray tracing with this tier of card. I'd avoid it on the 4060 anyway, so to be honest, realistically, I'd probably avoid it here. Next up we have Fortnite then running in DX12 mode. We have TAA enabled and 100% resolution scaling. Everything else is basically left at default, no nanite or lumen here. Jumping into the gameplay, and we are seeing 150 plus FPS, 86 as that 1% low and a 0.1% low of 10. So there were a couple of dips and drops as I jumped out of the bus at the beginning. That's pretty much the standard. As you can see though from the frame time graph, things are really smooth now, no complaints at all. Let's wipe out this other player. Shouldn't be too much trouble, there we go. Yeah, so pretty decent performance from Fortnite here, no troubles with the B580. Again, when I use DX11 first of all, a bit more stuttery, DX12 is definitely your best bet. Okay, so for Red Dead Redemption 2, we're going with ultra textures and everything else set to high, the same settings I'd use with the 4060 to be honest. As you can see here, video memory, we have 12188 MB available. That's really nice to see on a card of this tier. Alright, so jumping into the gameplay now, and what I have noticed thus far is that the game performs fine. We're seeing at least 100 FPS around Valentine, but when we move into the town, the GPU clock is dropping from its 2850 MHz max boost, and the frame rate is therefore dropping as well. Now this isn't ideal. I'm not exactly sure what's going on here for the card clock to drop. We're not CPU bottleneck. There should be no issues. I certainly didn't see an issue with the 4060 in this same area, so not sure what's going on here. Perhaps it's because I'm using Windows 10. So I'll have to check on this and get back. So for Cyberpunk 2077, I'm using the high settings, the high crowd density as well. This will be set to medium by default, so I up this to high, and the high textures. In game, we're seeing a very nice, smooth experience. We'll just take this car for a little ride around town. As you can see, once again, the GPU is being fully utilised here. Running nice and cool as well. Seems to sit around and under 60 degrees a lot of the time. The triple fan cooler whirring away very quietly inside the case here. I really do like this Sparkle OC option. It's not much more than the limited one. It was £10 more than the standard one, which was out of stock here in the UK. I basically bought the first one that came into stock. Didn't get sent a review sample. Intel, hook your boy up, please. If you want to, of course. But yeah, I bought this one, and I'm glad I did. I'll probably be keeping it. Or if I can find a limited edition one, I might swap it out for that, just because I like the sort of stock cards, like I like the Founders Edition Nvidia ones, for example. Right, so we'll move on to Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. I'm having a lot of fun playing this one. I'm actually taking it really slow. I'm still in the Vatican level. I've been here for ages, just trying to do all the collectible and side mission stuff. I actually ran this one at medium. We saw over 60 FPS. I think it was about 67 overall, 44 frames per second as that 1% low, and 32 as that 0.1% low. So there were definitely a few dips and drops here. Perhaps we could benefit from some upscaling, but I decided to leave things at native once again. But I wanted to keep things at native for this video to show you what this card could do at 1920 by 1080. Most of the time it's absolutely fine. A few drops below 60 here and there. A bit of a VRAM hog. This one, well, it's just a performance hog in general. It is quite an intensive game. Let's just start on these fellas over here. Probably a bad move. I've alerted the whole of the Vatican now. In action intensive scenes like this is where you're going to see dips and drops to below 60, but most of the time it remained pretty solid, and I think it still looks good with these settings as well. Okay, so we'll move on to our penultimate game, Stalker 2. A bit of bad news. Doesn't matter if we're using low or medium, we simply must enable XeSS. Now, quality will do. Doesn't look too different from native resolution, but this is a must in order to hit at least 60 frames per second. We saw about 63 on average here. There were still some dips and drops. You know, I'm having to make the same sacrifices really as I would with the 4060 as well, dropping the settings a little bit. We could probably benefit from low, but as I said, we're still going to need some form of upscaling with this one. Very intensive. We'll finalise then with Call of Duty Black Ops 6 1080p balanced. For some reason, the game doesn't think I've actually purchased it. I downloaded this through Game Pass, and we have this sometimes. We have a little back and forth. The Xbox store and I get into some arguments occasionally because it seems to think I don't actually purchase the games when I do. It's just a weird glitch thing. But yeah, we still get to play Nuketown for free. There's a free trial or something at the moment. Apparently there must be, because it doesn't seem to think I've bought the game, even though I have. But we're in here now. Never mind that. All I tend to do is just restart the Xbox app and then it's fine. So yeah, not sure what's going on there. What I can tell you for sure though is that performance is pretty solid at 1080p balanced. I am doing okay in Call of Duty. I'm not too bad at this one. A lot of online shooters, CS2 for example, I get destroyed every time. But Black Ops 6, I fare pretty well. It's probably because I've been used to Nuketown for a while. I mean, I've been playing Nuketown since the old Black Ops days. I know this map like the back of my hand, to be fair. 87 FPS on average, a 1% low of 51, and a 0.1% low of 47. So pretty good all round for this, what I'm going to call the new mainstream king. No explicitly obvious driver issues during today's tests in those older games either. The only problem I did have was with Red Dead Redemption 2, which was a bit of a weird one. The core clock dropping in and around Valentine. A lot of the time, or most of the time, it was playable, but that's something I'm going to have to keep an eye on. It's probably something I'm doing my end, but I'll have to leave a pinned comment if I manage to figure it out, or if anyone knows what that's all about, let me know. I just don't want to upgrade to Windows 11, that's the thing. Maybe that'll fix it, but if it does, I'll still be sticking on 10 for now. But yeah, the ARC B580, really good card. I've really enjoyed my time with it so far, and I'll be testing a few more games individually as well, specifically older ones. You can probably tell what's coming if you've been a viewer for a while, but thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you next time.